With me today, we have Sharon Newport of Sharon Newport, LLC. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you so much, Lucas. I'm so pleased to be here with you.
Glad you're here. Why don't you start out, Sharon, tell us a little bit about yourself or your career and Sharon Newport, LLC.
All right. Yes. So I have been in associations for almost 15 years. Started off as an association executive for well over 10 years, and I'm now supporting associations on a systems level around change and transformation, specializing in culture, which includes DEI and leadership. Loving what I do, love being part of the association space, but like many, I fell into it. I came to the association space through the communications department because previously I had been producing documentary television and film, and wanted a break from the rigor of worldwide production. And I thought, let me just take this other job. I'll get bored and then I'll go back to television. And I just lit up.
That's a great experience, though.
Yeah. It was a really cool way to come into the world, but I also didn't really know what I was getting into. I didn't know what an association was, like many folks. And I just fell in love. Within the first 6 months, I got promoted, as many do in associations. You get to move around pretty nimbly. But it was also a promotion that got me into the boardroom. And it got me to see more about the board component, the leadership component. I thought, not only is this a slower pace for my life, right, compared to what I was doing before, but it's a pace at which I think my leadership has room to grow here. And that was particularly appealing to me because I've always gravitated toward leadership roles. But in production, leadership looks different. It's very top down, and that's not really my nature. And I really fell into production also from another industry because my undergraduate degree is from a professional actor training program in New York. And I've really always seen myself as somebody who wants, from a wide scale, wants to help bring people together. And through our humanitarian type of experiences, our experiences of each other's humanity and communicating and storytelling and being with each other, we can see each other and therefore see ourselves, and start to imagine how we together can do something really different and powerful in this world. And so I've looked at documentaries that way. I looked at myself as an actor that way. And I started to be able to see myself as a leader in this big system called associations that help so many people on so many levels. So I got hooked. Mm-hmm.
I hear you on the little bit slower in the lifestyle piece of associations, and that's not an unfamiliar dialogue or description. However, I feel like the offset of that is there's so much mission and drive behind what's being done within the organization. There's an excitement about that, right?
Oh, absolutely. Well, see, what I didn't want to have anymore. So worldwide production did have me, particularly in the parts of the world, like the MENA region, et cetera, where they're 7 hours ahead. They have different work days. I was everyone else's clock. And by the way, I was an independent contractor, paying my own benefits, never sleeping. So I just needed a different lifestyle. Now, obviously, in associations, we work our butt off. It's not to say I was having 8-hour days, by no means. In fact, I was working television hours. And so people would say, don't stop working 12-hour days like it's nothing. Like, get out of here with that. And so it took me several years to recalibrate to the rhythm and the lack of rigor that I needed to have, like television required, but also recalibrate to what does an association need of me that I want to give. And that also not just had a different kind of hours and approach, but it also had a different voice. Mm-hmm. It had a different series of lenses on how we get done what we get done and how I operate through the committees, and all of those things were new to me. And I had my leader at the time, the CEO, was say, we operate a little slower, but it's because we want more voices at the table and we will get it done. I thought, I like more voices at the table, right? Okay, I'm motivated to go a little slower. And
there's a little bit more of a group herd mentality. I mean, there's a negative connotation to that sometimes, but it is, right? There's power in the perspectives of bringing all of that together rather than, you can move fast. If one person makes all the decisions and you just chime forward and yes, we're doing this, we're not doing that, we're doing this, we're not doing that. Well, of course, we could move super fast, but would we be representative of the greater group or audience that we're trying to represent?
Indeed. One of the things I say to my clients now, I have two phrases that soothed me once I learned these phrases. And so I say them a lot to my clients. One is, we're going to go slow to go fast. And so that lets people calm down around urgency. That sometimes is just real passion for doing the thing, right? It's just urgency. And then the other is comes from the disability rights community. There's a book that was written in the 70s called Nothing About Us Without Us. And there's been some iterations of that phrase that is, don't build for us without us. And, associations were structured to operate around those kinds of premises. Whether we always live up to them or not, we're learning how to recalibrate in this moment. But that is fundamentally, we are intended to be systems that create belonging. And so let's level up the ways in which we do that.
And it creates a great opportunity to represent the masses. It also creates the challenge of collaboration, right? Okay. And so let's talk a little bit about how you're now using your gifts to help facilitate some of that conversation, because it can be difficult, and it should be honest, and it should be candid. As I shared, that's words that we use within our organization. But that's kind of where you come in, right? Because that's where it can get messy. And how can we help facilitate some of that change that we want to implement for the better of the group, and maybe, if I want to just take it as far, the better of the world, but see, at least in the moment and for the greater mission, help that organization.
Indeed. That's usually the moment I get the call, right? Where
there it is. Have they hit the iceberg, as I said? Yeah.
That's right. We're learning to see what's underneath and above on that iceberg. And they may not know all that. They don't, you don't always know what you don't know. But they know enough to know we need a third party help. So I usually get the call in that moment, and it shows up in different ways as you're describing, right? It can be around what's going on with staff, what's going on with the board, what's happening with the association as a whole, and what do we need to do next. And so in my work, I operate within the context of organizational development. It's a social science around change and transformation, and it focuses on culture. So it is a proven process by which we support the organization on how they want to get to what they want to get to, and help identify why do we want to do it and what do we want to do. Right. And let me help you with the how. And my job is to create a process and a container that, based on what I'm picking up in the data from the organization, because I'll do a data assessment on not just readiness, but what do we all see? Do we agree on what we see? Do we agree on why we're here and what we're doing? And what is the conversation we need to have around that in order to determine what change is, how we get there, and is the goal short, long, forever?
Yeah, forever. It's forever. I'll just share it now.
That's right. It is infinite.
Spoiler alert.
The stuff I'm working on with folks will be an infinite journey. Indeed.
You're trained in this stuff, right? You've gotten the certifications, the neuroscience education. You've taken the courses at Georgetown. You now adjunctly teach the courses at Georgetown for folks that want to come through there and learn more about how you do what you do and why you do what you do. Tell us a little bit about the Georgetown adjunct, and then maybe go back to associations. Give us some examples on things that you're working today. You can sanitize it. We don't have to say the names of the clients. I don't think they would want to necessarily have that out there, but the sense of like what type of work you're doing and the real life applications of that.
Yeah.
And then we'll get into the challenges.
Yeah, indeed. That's the neat, right? So I'll name what brought me to Georgetown. So as an association executive, my association was in the attempt to come out of the 2008 recession, working very hard at changing everything in the association. Everything. Wow. We had a hybrid membership model as the merger of a trade and a society, and we changed it further. And frankly, we ended up with, shout out to Reggie Henry at ASAE.
Oh, yeah.
I happened to have a wonderful conversation with him at Annual in probably 2017 that helped us revisit our model, which is very similar to what ASAE was about to launch for themselves. We were in the process of launching something similar. He really helped us think through that. We rebranded our magazine. We were a certifying organization, and we had 5 new certifications we were adding and changing the philosophy of the education. We were rebranding the organization, changing our website. I mean, everything.
Oh, was that all?
That's all. Oh, and then we were like, I guess we should change our name.
Oh, yeah.
So, everything, right?
And then there's the financial aspect of everything, right?
There's the investment and the return on the investment, right? And that became a huge deal, as you can imagine. But I also, while the members were happy, there was something about that process that I was like, there's something in here we're not getting right. And I don't know what, because I'm not an expert at this. And I decided I wanted to go back to school to learn more about systems change. And that's how I fell into the program at Georgetown for organizational development. And I'd never heard of organizational development. I was like, I don't know what that means, but I want to learn this thing because I like the description on the program.
Yeah. Changing organizations. You recognized and went through a process with something that needed changes. You identified a potential opportunity and you jumped on. I think that's great.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And it also turned out to be another pivotal career changing moment because I didn't know I'd go to this program and feel like it asked something about me as a practitioner and association executive to use myself in a manner that took everything I had ever done and made it applicable. So the things I'd learned in acting class were suddenly being asked of me as a conduit and in my use of self as a consultant, much less as an executive. I mean, it brought so much of my entire life experience and professional experience into focus in a way that I thought, oh, this is going to be my next chapter. And I don't know when that is because I'm not afraid to change careers, as you can hear from my history. But I knew it would come after I'd had more time in associations and I'd had more chance to walk through the change that we were building. But I had started to kind of work on the side around those things. At that time, I also in that same year, coincidentally, as you ask for change and change shows up, I got accepted into the Diversity Executive Leadership Program at ASAE, the DELP program. And that is a career changing opportunity. I became a CAE and I dove further into learning more about associations as complex, beautiful systems that really have the power to change the world. And I also had the opportunity to move our association into an AMC model and had the opportunity to learn about the AMC model. And so I was getting all of this kind of science around it. But now that I'm doing it full time and have been doing it full time for a little while now, I was able to then go back to Georgetown and not only build a new class that supports leadership and particularly leadership around use of self and in particular use of their own knowledge in their body. Right? The somatic, soma being Greek for body, the somatic understanding of the real science behind the gut feeling.
Yeah.
The real science behind, I can't prove it. I just have a sense, right? And
there's something in there. Yeah.
There's something in there that I'm just sensing.
Right? An urge.
Exactly. And there is an intelligence in there. There is real science to it. And if we can understand it and then learn how it's contextualized for ourselves and how our life experience has shaped us, not only does it help us lean into our own leadership with more skill and frankly, more ease, because there's so much data in there that makes the experience of leading much easier, particularly in this complex world. It models better for a system to see a leader in that ease, even in a complex moment. And it also changes what's possible for those around them. So I got excited about teaching that and being able to go back to the program I've graduated from and be a learning team coach, a member of the faculty team. And as you can hear, I keep saying the phrase use of self, which I know consultants use and association executives don't use, but it does turn out to be the class that I'm going to teach next year. So I'm very excited about that.
Well, the sense of self, kind of going back to the association. So if everybody brings themselves and the role within the organization to bring people together in order to make the decisions, you're inherently creating a better decision through multiple perspectives, right? I talked about this recently with somebody. There was a session down in ASAE, and one of my folks was part of that panel, and they led it, and it was on sponsorship. And instead of standing up there and just talking about the ideas that they had, they turned everything around. So they would talk about a topic, then they would give an example, and then they'd ask everybody to turn to the people around them. You're now a group. You all have input, and then we're going to take the team's input and we're going to share it collectively. And at the end of the session, they created this big, massive list of sponsorship opportunities and ideas and thoughts, and they shared it with everybody in the sense of the collective wisdom was greater than the individual. Nobody in that room could have made the greatest decision or had the best, ideas or collectively the volume of ideas. And the same, I would argue is true with the associations. If you're making decisions as a board or a group, you bring all of that wisdom and perspective and self and gut feelings, and that can be really strong. And if everybody finds a way to communicate, and I think this is where having an outside consultant like yourself come in to help facilitate and pull that out instead of lessening some of the voice that could be sort of trying to gather the best of everything that's in the room, right?
Indeed. You've said a few complex scenarios really concisely. So let me tease them out a little. So from we call it OD, from an OD perspective, very much like coaching, we believe that there's wisdom in the system. So our job is to help source that and create the conditions for which it can rise. Mm-hmm. Depending on what the thing is, the system might not have enough education or knowledge or discernment to create wise action. So sometimes that's where we would show up to intervene and say, let's create some space for some growth, right? Some education, some knowledge, experiential stuff. So to your point about the complexity of what might be going on and how to get at it, like conflict or, something that really a lot of people don't feel equipped around. Let's create some spaciousness and some growth opportunity for the folks that are involved to know how to recognize certain things in themselves and how it shows up when it shows up. How do I show up when it shows up? What would I prefer to have show up? How do I cultivate that so that the system can remain calm, that leaders can remain calm, and that we can have the dialogue we need to have to move through this and make wise decisions and create wise action. And that shows up in lots of different ways, as we can imagine, in the process of change and transformation. But I do part of the readiness is, how do systems show up, particularly in conflict? Are we not having any? And that's just magically beautiful, because that's not real.
No, ever.
Right? When systems say, oh, we just don't have any. Well, okay. I mean, right now. But, one of the things I always try to tell my client and up front when they don't quite seem to have a sense of what change looks like is that, to my point earlier, when you seek change is going to come. And it's not always going to come in the way you have imagined. People might leave. Right? When you're in real adaptive work, people might not stick around. Not everybody wants to go. You might decide that what you're building for in the future requires new voices. You might not even know what it is yet, but you're on a path and you're going to be generative and experimental as you go. I mean, that's part of what we're calling in the framework of adaptive leadership and adaptive challenges right now, that we're somehow experimenting and we don't always know where we're headed, but we know it's got to be in this direction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I want to take one step back for a second. Let's say I have this gut feeling, right, that I need to change something. Because again, we talked about most people come to us as consultants in the industry and after they've hit the iceberg, right? Something's happened. There's been an incident. Something's going downhill the wrong way or trending in the wrong direction. Now let's reflect, because always in that instance, there were signs, right? The lights went out. I lost my binoculars. I couldn't see the iceberg, whatever it was, the excuse. There were signs. What are some of those signs, if somebody's listening today, that we could start to get them thinking about, I want to do this before I hit the iceberg? What are some of those warning signs? And I think you already mentioned one. There's no communication system in place to talk about what's hard, or you feel like there's a culture where we're not having difficult conversations. That would be one I think you've kind of already given. What are some of the others that you can think of that?
Concerns about trust that's inherent to that same frame. I would also say, a lot of what's coming to me, particularly around DEI, is that we know how to stay on the surface. We have not figured out how to have the more difficult conversations, and folks are feeling scared or nervous. And we know we want to, but we don't know how. And that's okay. I don't want to say that that's a whisper, but they only can reflexively look back and go, yeah, we just wanted to do the holidays and like some memes and like some food celebrations. And we realized that didn't do anything and it wasn't anything. And I've even had clients tell the beautiful story to other associations to say, hey, we thought we were doing something when we created a task force. And then the task force came together and then started spinning their wheels and getting very frustrated. And then we realized we gave them no money and we gave them no resources and we expected them to do something. And then they realized, oh my gosh, we have to create an unbudgeted line if we're going to do anything this year, or we're going to wait, and we don't feel like we can wait. And so, so there's usually some sort of something that is in retrospect that they can recognize. But I'll say, to your point about the gut instinct and the leader themselves, is I feel like all of us, but particularly leaders, are being asked to operate very quickly in this moment, like unusually fast in this moment. And
it's a transactional culture. You got to move fast.
That's right. And
it shouldn't take more than 25 seconds.
We are seeking ways to just get at a problem and make it go away, when in fact it might be so complex. There might be paradox, there might be polarity, there might be things that are really going to create some stuckness, that if as a leader you can slow yourself down and go, this is bigger than a checkbox can fulfill. This is not a technical problem. This is an adaptive challenge, right? This requires more of us to get at it.
Right.
And, and then you go call your partner or go find a partner or series of partners in the process. But I think if the leader can slow themselves down, their gut sees the whisper before it's a yell. And, I think we all know what it feels like to be in that moment. And the other component is, this might be an unpopular way of framing, but there is a theory called the holographic theory of leadership. And for a long tenured CEO, the traits of the CEO are the traits of the organization. And that's wonderful in some ways, but it also means whatever they're unconscious to, so is the organization. And a good leader can go, yep, that's me, right? I am learning this area and I'm still figuring it out. And therefore so is my organization. So let's go get some support, because we all don't know what we don't know sometimes. Or as we start to identify it, it doesn't mean we have a solution, but we know, oh, look at this area. It was occluded to me before that we weren't tackling this, but now we can. And here are some of the symptoms that I'm seeing in retrospect. So I say I'm speaking on it very broadly because of the nature of what comes my way can look different. But there is usually these key signs, to your point, about stuff that was said or unsaid, that they're realizing, oh, gosh, that created a problem. There's
usually the unsaid stuff, I think, is worse than the stuff that's said, isn't it? Would you agree?
Yes and no. So sometimes the stuff, I have folks that are coming to me and saying, my board members are speaking out in social media about something that happened in the boardroom. Right. Or, stuff that is really inappropriate and being said that is really pretty harmful, particularly around a DEI thing.
If they're coming to you, my point is it was unsaid to them, right?
Oftentimes. Yeah. Often it's the unsaid that people are going, we don't even know how to talk about this, or we can tell this is happening underneath.
Uncomfortable.
And therefore there's a trust issue. There's usually some sort of disagreement about what is or what's going on or why we're doing it. And therefore a disagreement about where we're going and how we're getting there. And so that comes back to those real basics. Why are we doing something? What are we doing? And how are we going to get there? And do we agree on that stuff? So current state, future state stuff. It's really at the end of the day needs to be very, very simple, but it can feel so complex because that's our world. It's messy.
Yeah. And I think going back to your reference on the DEI stuff where you throw up a meme or you follow the holidays, I always liken that to, if I bought a foosball table and I put it out there in the office, I created a fun culture. Well, no, I didn't, because if I don't go out there and actually interact with people on the foosball table, it's not really the foosball table, right? It's the opportunity that you can use that as a platform to have conversation, talk with people, be outside of work. And most people are remote and don't have the proverbial foosball table anymore. But for example, I take folks down to a strategic planning meeting, or we go to an event. If we don't do anything other than just go there to work together, did I have the real impact? Like, why did we bring everybody? Right? It's all the stuff that happens outside of that. Do I lean into the relationship? Am I having the other conversations? And so, yeah, you can put up a meme, follow a holiday, but unless you talk about why you're doing that, the impact is not going to be there.
That's right. What I try to say, again, the conversation around what is culture I mean, I ask this every time I'm with the system where we're addressing culture specifically, what is culture? How does it show up in this organization? And people get there, but it takes a minute for folks to go, this is culture, that is culture. And culture is exactly what you've named. So let's pretend the foosball table is put in the kitchen because there's no other space for people to gather. It's just the place where the food is, right? Maybe there's a conference room. How do you walk in an office and know where the boss is? Is it because they're the one with the biggest office? Like, all of those pieces are also culture. And really, at the end of the day, culture is how we be together. Yeah. And it influences what we can do together and how we do it. Yeah. And so we want the culture that supports the effectiveness of the moment, and that it is always evolving, it is always being massaged, and it will change as fast as somebody leaves and somebody else comes over. And that we have to, just like we tell people with their board, it's like you had 3 roll off and you had 3 more come on, you've got a new board, right? It's not just a new year, it's a different group. Right. And the more we can normalize that and create processes by which we are always centering how we be together before we center what we do together, we can look at that differently. And so therefore the DEI component, when we're looking at holidays and meals, are we looking at holidays and meals, or are we looking how we be together and talking about what that means in the context of the new cultural education component that we could be in together? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I like it to what you said earlier around trust is, what are the elements that will help us do work and do life together such that we can build trust, such that the conversation is not that difficult. I feel like there's almost, and this is one of the things I like best about our personal culture, there's almost nothing we couldn't talk about, right, as a group and put on the table and work through. I recognize that that's, somewhat unique. And I know that you get to witness a lot of cultures where that's just not evident, right? It doesn't exist, where maybe they haven't done as much life, or they haven't built enough trust. And I'm curious, are there other factors, suggestions that you've implemented into some of these strategies? Don't give them all away. I want people to come talk to you about all the great things that you do. But if you could give just a couple of examples on where you got into that conversation and, oh, this was lacking. This was lacking. This was lacking.
Yeah. One of the big things that comes up is that particularly in a difficult conversation, or even a just more challenging one, there's a lot of focus on their intent. Here's what I intend to do, which is important to identify and try to align. But what really matters, and what leaders need to be checking on, and we need to normalize as like our way of being in a healthy culture, is we're going to center the impact. So here was my intent. Did it have that impact on you? And if it didn't, let's talk about it. Like, it's that simple, right? And if you said something to me and I can tell that wasn't your intent, but the impact on me was like horrible, and I know you well enough to know that's probably not what you meant. Right. Can we enter me saying, hey, can I have a conversation with you? When we were talking about something, I'm certain your intent was so good around this, that, and the other, but can I talk about the impact on me? Because I'm not sure if it matches what you showed up to do, right? And
we should just snip that little voice snip out right there, because the way that you delivered that was perfect, right? And it was professional. It showed trust. It showed vulnerability, but at the same time, it would induce conversation.
And it remained calm. So this is where it goes back to the body stuff, is that people get very nervous to have something like that, have that kind of conversation because of emotion and meaning and depth and fear and all that stuff. But how do we keep ourselves so calm that it makes the impact of the conversation go well? Yeah.
Yeah. The calmness, because you're right. As soon as it starts to escalate, it becomes like a snowball, right? The anxiety, the pressure, the nervousness, the feelings that are going to be starting to exchange. And you've seen a lot of relationships disintegrate because they're not diffused. And sometimes you need to diffuse before you can rebuild. In fact, almost every case, right?
I agree. I think the big thing about, not the big, but one of the big things about conflict is that it is something that made me feel I got farther from you, right? Mm-hmm. Something showed up that made me feel further from you. And if I show up with the goal of, I want to be closer to you, I want this to be something that is better for us, can we have that conversation? If we're centering the even just the imaginary physicality of us being in the same circle, right? And how does that change the way we show up together to have this conversation and therefore go do good work because we are closer together because of this?
Absolutely. And as you're thinking, as you're talking and I'm thinking through, there is sort of a mantra there as a leader. If you take the stance of, if I know Sharon better, I will be better, right? As an individual, as a leader. And so as much as I need to lean in and understand as possible as I can do, and I can't do that, as you say, if we start to feel like we're pushing apart.
Yeah. One of the things that is such a challenge for leaders is the premise that you do have to be contextual in your use of leadership with people, right? You have to meet people where they are, and that's different for everyone on your team. And it should change your presence, therefore, right? And, Amy Cuddy is an expert on presence, and she talks about it like the beer tap at the bar. It's like, do I need some Guinness or do I need some Bud Light? Or like, what's the presence that is being asked of me in this moment, given the situation and the people involved? And being able to get yourself to a place where you are calm, no matter what the thing is, that you are delivering with a centering around the impact on them, because your job is to show up in that, right? It requires a lot of us as leaders. And I think we need to normalize that we need space to cultivate that. And in my teaching of that, I don't want that to be muscling. I want that to create ease. Mm-hmm. The more ease that you have in your experience as a leader, even though you're doing complex stuff, the more capacity you have to handle the stuff that, we can't always just breathe our way through. Right? It really requires a lot more skill than a little bit of breath and a little bit of centering, right? It requires something else. And what we know neurologically is that if we can stay in our executive function, which is the thing that goes away when conflict shows up for a lot of us, we kind of like evacuate the premises in some way, even though our body is present. If we can stay focused in our executive function and stay creative, stay relational, stay calm, stay focused on the innovation and the relationship between us that will continue beyond this conversation and probably in the next meeting in the next hour. If we can focus on those things, it makes more things feel possible and people attune to you. You have to set the tone that they are attuning to, and it quells the nervous system of the entire organization when you can do that over time.
Yeah, that's a great example. Just setting the tone. How do you measure that? And in terms of calculating when you come into a new organization, and you talked earlier about the readiness, what are some of those things that you look for that can be green lights or red flags about readiness? When you're talking to a CEO or a board member, sort of pre-consult.
Yeah. If I'm not talking to the CEO,
there you go.
If someone else has been sent to talk to me, and it's about culture, I get very curious about that, right? And sometimes it's that, they're going to join this conversation. I'm sent to have the first ones with the new people we might interview. Okay, but I will need the CEO to do this job with us. I recognize people on the team might play a role in helping it get done, but the CEO and I need private relationship. So that's super important. And I will say that any CEO who is not somehow deeply engaged, we can be flexible about what that looks like, in culture change or transformation of any nature. The vacuum that they're creating has an unintended consequence, because it will get filled, and it will get filled with something you probably didn't want. And so I just want to avoid that. And I feel an ethical component to that, right? I don't want to create an unintended consequence for any of my clients, especially when I know it could come, right? So I get that out right away, and I normalize the premise of that importance. Some of the other things are when, in terms of the more red flags, if they need more time and space to identify what's going on, it has me asking bigger questions around what's going on. If we know we need help, or having a hard time putting our finger on it, there's nothing wrong with that, but it does mean that we need to slow down even more in order to get some alignment around those who would be leading the change before we go and actually ask anyone to follow them. So that, and sometimes folks don't know that that's what's going on until I've asked some questions that they're realizing, oh, I don't know what I think of that or how to answer that, or we haven't been addressing that. And that's okay. It just makes me go, okay, so there's a little process before the process. And can we talk about that? And usually that's welcomed because they just want help, right? And so that's good. I would say some of
but that's almost a green light too, that they're coming to you. There's a little bit of okay, they've made the first step. There's some self-recognition or some recognition somewhere in this organization that change is needed.
That's right. And what it looks like, they clearly are going to learn, right? And we're all going to learn together. I would also say if someone thinks that this is an event and not a process, that we're going to do a thing, or like a staff retreat, that sounds like a really big deal, big investment. We're going to bring a third party in, we're going to collect some data, and then like whatever we decide is what we're going to do. Maybe, but that's actually just an event in a process. And if we don't hold the process, that's right. We're going to have some unintended consequences there. Some of the green lights, I would say, are, well, they could be perceived in any kind of way, but I get particularly excited when there's clear commitment and buy-in. And I don't care that they don't know how to do it. That's what they're asking for help for, right?
Right.
But I would also say that you learn pretty quickly a system's capacity for like pushing their own boundaries versus please don't make us move too fast. We can really handle like increments. Either are okay, but I get particularly excited when they have a real capacity to move. Right. I've had a client that over the course of a year on a 10-person staff, really across staff and board, were so excited that in the course of about a year and a half-ish, we were able to go all across the entire volunteers and the staff to deliver education, create systemic change, create systematic change, and start to really move in a way that the members could see. And in their public statement about, this was DEI related, in their public statement, they said, hold us accountable and be on the journey with us. And I thought,
there you go.
I want to work with that group, right? Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. So that gets exciting when you're seeing, I don't bias the notion of going fast, but I bias the readiness for the work. And that was a really particular high level readiness component that I'll give shout outs to them because they've presented with me at ASAE about their work, which was Radiology Business Management Association, RBMA. They've done really good work over the last several years.
That's fantastic. I always hate when I have to kind of like wrap us up, but I feel like that was such a high note. I want to leave on that one. And there's so much more. I encourage people to reach out to you, Sharon, and whether they have the gut feeling or whether they've hit the iceberg. I can't encourage them enough to reach out and at least start an initial conversation and then go gauge from there about how ready they are and what they're willing to do and go all in. But I do have to wrap us up, unfortunately. But as we talked about at the end of our episodes, we like to ask, is there someone else, Sharon, out there within your network you think would be just a fantastic resource to share with our audience?
I sure do. Desiree Knight. She has just completed her role as chair of PCMA, first Black female chair of PCMA. And I'm so excited about what her leadership is doing in the space. I will, in full transparency, admit she's also a DELP colleague of mine. So I've also been a part of her journey from that perspective. And I think your audience would love to hear what's on her mind.
Well, that's great. We've had the pleasure of having some fantastic DELP members on the show already. And so I look forward to continuing to expand that. And thank you again, Sharon, for joining us and for your time and for sharing your wisdom and your nuggets of industry gold here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
Our pleasure.